today's In the News session with Chris Scalia. Hi, Chris. Chris Scalia is a writer, thinker, and cultural commentator at the American Enterprise Institute, and where he explores the evolution of conservative thought, free speech, and the role of the humanities in a highly polarized world. Mr. Scalia is a former English professor, and his work has been featured in leading publications in the past, such as the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the National Review. He has also co-edited collections of speeches by his father, the late Supreme Court Chief Justice, Antonin Scalia. Mr. Scalia's upcoming book, 13 Novels Conservatives Will Love But Probably Haven't Read, argues that storytelling is a powerful force in shaping political thought. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by the director for the Goldfarb Center, Allison B.A., and Wilson Bailey, class of 27. Special thanks to the Colby College English Department for co-sponsoring this event, and thank you all for being here, and we hope you guys enjoy tonight's conversation. Thank you.
So thank you, Chris, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Some of you may know that I am not Professor Aaron Hanlon, who is supposed to be moderating tonight, so I'm going to play an English professor. Lawyer playing English professor is a bad idea, but I'm going to do my best and bring some of Professor Hanlon's questions to the stage as well as some of my own. But we are so happy that you joined us and flew up today, so thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Looking forward to this conversation. Thank all of you for coming out tonight. It's great.
Great. I think we're going to have Wilson kick us off tonight.
So you work at one of the premier policy think tanks, the American Enterprise Institute, but as was noted by your introduction, your work primarily revolves around theory-derived, more humanistic things. Can you speak to how your work fits into a DC landscape that's riddled with reporters, political operatives, and policy wonks?
You make it sound so riddled with, like these are bad things to be around, and you might have a point. My job is very weird for a DC policy think tank. The American Enterprise Institute hired me to be a scholar a couple of years ago, in part to kind of fill out this department they'd founded just a few years before that, the Department of Social, Constitutional, and Cultural Studies. And when they had started that, they had already got the social side down, the constitutional side down, but they wanted to really bolster the cultural considerations. So they hired me and a few other people to look at those things. And the thinking is that even at a DC policy think tank, culture is important. And the conservative journalist Andrew Breitbart, like 15 years ago or so, said something that conservatives really latched onto, which is that politics is downstream from culture, meaning if you can't really expect to have political power unless you also have some sort of cultural influence. And I think that particular metaphor probably oversimplifies the situation. It might be more like a whirlpool between culture and politics. But the general idea is right, that culture is important. And I'm speaking about culture pretty broadly. I write about pop culture. I write about literary culture. I write about those different things because they are expressions of ideas that matter to a culture and to a society. And so I don't go on Capitol Hill and tell congressmen what they should be listening to or what they should be reading. Not yet, but hopefully maybe I will someday. But it's important for all Americans, and I think conservatives are probably worse at it, to think about the culture they're engaging with and that they're trying to create, because it really does, it both reflects and shapes a society.
So now that we've located you within DC, I'd like to shift to where we are now, which is a liberal arts college. Mm-hmm. The liberal arts college in their model has been recently and even for decades take Alan Bloom's The Closing of the American Mind, for example, has been much derided, and you see this now even more so with Trump and his rhetoric. But my guess is that you have a fonder view of the liberal arts. So can you speak to what we're missing in our current vision of the liberal arts and what the anti-education portion of the Republican Party is missing in
Yeah.
their conception of the liberal arts.
Well, let me start off by saying it's a bipartisan problem. Republicans love making fun of the liberal arts, and they always say things like, you know, the federal government shouldn't fund your degree in underwater basket weaving. And it's always that example, underwater basket weaving. I'm not making that up. They say that all the time, and I don't understand why. Because that actually sounds like an incredible skill that could get you a lot of money after graduation. But Democrats, too, you remember Tim Walz during the campaign was making fun of J.D. Vance for studying philosophy as an undergrad. And he said that you're out of, basically, something along the lines of J.D. Vance was a fancy pants because he was out of touch and not normal. He was weird for studying philosophy. The first op-ed I ever wrote, that's the first time I wrote something for the Wall Street Journal, which is very exciting for me, was 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago this month, actually. Marco Rubio, who was then running against Donald Trump, who had not been president yet, and he was making fun of the liberal arts, and his argument was that, again, as I said, federal government should not be. We need fewer philosophers and fewer. I think the example he gave was we need fewer Roman philosophers, and we need more people who can do actual work and get jobs after they graduate. And my op-ed was conservatives shouldn't talk this way about the liberal arts because not necessarily everybody should study the liberal arts, but people should study the liberal arts. They are worthwhile. And especially from a conservative perspective, they're significant. The founders, who conservatives tend to really look up to, the founders thought that the liberal arts were crucial to self-governing people. Because the liberal arts taught virtue, they taught history, and so through an understanding of history, you knew how to avoid tyranny, how to stop tyranny, and how people could really achieve self-rule. Examples like that. So that was that, and also people who major in the liberal arts, contrary to popular belief, are not poor and destitute for the rest of their lives. They actually do get good jobs. And initially, the last I saw, the pay was less than other majors like engineering and things like that, but they gradually caught up. So the notion that a liberal arts major is unemployable is also is overstated. So I hope that's good news for some of you there. Tell your parents to relax. So again, it's a bipartisan problem where everybody likes to make fun of the liberal arts because they seem impractical. But they are, in fact, I think, very practical, especially in a democracy where it's important for everybody to think deeply about what it means to be a good person and what it means to live a good life. The liberal arts facilitate that in ways that other majors don't. Now, I don't want to go so far as some people who defend the liberal arts say, you study the liberal arts so you can be truly and fully human. But that's obviously condescending nonsense because you can major in engineering and still be truly and fully human too. Liberal arts majors tend to focus on what it means to be human in their studies.
So I wanted to just quickly follow up. So you seem to be saying that the liberal arts are good for us, but where does the tension lie in the fact that the liberal arts are also necessarily elite? Here we are at this elite institution getting this elite liberal arts education.
I don't think they are necessarily elite. They shouldn't be. I think they probably are. I haven't looked at the numbers about the income level of who's actually studying the liberal arts, but there's pressure to not study the liberal arts because for a number of reasons. One is that college is, I don't know if you guys noticed, college is not cheap. And so you or your parents really want to be sure that you get the return on investment as quickly as possible. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier about the general stereotype that liberal arts students aren't really going to earn anything after they graduate. In my experience, that isn't true. Consulting firms, places like that pay well, actually like liberal arts majors because liberal arts majors can read well, they can write well, they can think critically, they can analyze closely, things like that. And again, those are skills that really everybody needs or could use. I taught at a liberal arts college for 8 years. It was a public liberal arts college in the Appalachian region of Virginia. It was not an elite school, and its students were not wealthy. But the college was founded in the 1950s because there were no state schools anywhere near that part of Virginia, and it was consciously a liberal arts school because the feeling in the state of Virginia was that this is something that should be available to everybody. The liberal arts should not be elitist. They should be available to everybody at affordable state institutions, and so that's why that particular college was founded. I did find, unfortunately, that a lot of the students who went there didn't know what the liberal arts were. So we had a gen ed curriculum where they would have to take, God bless them, they had to take freshman composition with me, for example, and they would wonder, why am I taking freshman composition when I'm going to be a nursing major? What does this have to do, and why do I have to take this philosophy class or learn these languages? And so a lot of what I did the first couple of weeks at that school was explain and justify the liberal arts and why they were taking these supposedly irrelevant classes.
So we titled, when you and I first spoke about you coming up, we decided that we wanted to title the talk about the novel and democracy. Not words that necessarily go hand in hand in most of our discussions here about politics, policy, and the press. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about why you think reading, the art of reading, of reading literature is such an important part of our democracy.
Okay. Let me first say that the main argument I make in favor of reading is that it's fun. And any art form, the first reason you should experience it is that if you know how to encounter it, if you know what to look for, it is an immense source of joy. And then there are a lot of other great things about it, but literature in particular is a source of so much excitement, joy, pleasure, beauty, wonder, kind of immeasurable, unquantifiable things that sometimes we're uncomfortable talking about, but we like them, and so that they're good things in and of themselves. I think the novel as an art form is especially helpful or productive for citizens in a democracy because one of the central elements of a novel, many novels, not all novels, is sympathy. Learning how other people think, understanding why other people, even fictional people, behave as they do, why they make the decisions they make. Now, obviously, novels aren't the only forms of art that do that. I mean, you could make a similar argument about theater, for example, but I think novels, because they let you get so deeply into the psychology of characters, authors can help you understand those characters more deeply. Now, understanding is not the same as agreeing with or approving what characters do. I recently taught Middlemarch, the George Eliot novel from, I think, 1872. It is not short. Has anybody here read Middlemarch? Awesome. Okay, good. It's pretty good, right? You didn't like it. I'll make you love it in the next 5 minutes. How many of you read it and loved it? All right, good. Thank you for putting your hand up way up. All right. You get extra credit. Middlemarch is a very long novel about a small village in England, a provincial town in England, at a time of great social and political change. And the main character, a young woman named Dorothea, is an extraordinary, good, smart woman who makes some bad decisions. Well, she marries the wrong guy. The man she marries is an old man who she thinks is a great academic, and it turns out he's not. He's kind of a loser. Lots of spoilers ahead, by the way. And he becomes jealous of her and her relationship with somebody else, and he acts out on that jealousy and does some pretty sinister things. And from the get-go, you recognize this is not the right man for her. And you think, boy, she shouldn't be marrying this guy. And gosh, this guy makes some bad decisions and is just mean to her. He doesn't understand her. But there are a couple of moments in the novel when Eliot's narrator slows down and says something along the lines of, don't be too hard on Casaubon. That's the character's name. Don't be too hard on him. This is where he's coming from. This is what he was thinking. This is why you should actually have some sympathy for him. You never approve of what he does, but you understand what he does. The novel, when it really developed in England, it was during the 18th century, and it coincided with philosophers and thinkers like David Hume and Adam Smith are probably the most prominent, who were really interested in sympathy generally. Why do we react as we do to the pain of other people, whether it's real-life pain or pain we see on stage? What is it about that pain that stirs emotion in us? And that philosophical interest carried over into literature. And the novel, I don't think it's a coincidence that the novel really took off in England as people were thinking more and more about sympathy and developing theories of sympathy. And in fact, there's kind of a subgenre of 18th century literature, the novel of sensibility, where characters would, by our standards, overreact to the pain of other people. Everybody would, like it was a sign of virtue if you broke down sobbing at the pain of somebody else. And that might be overdoing it, but the point was, if you did that, you were a good person because you had a lot of sympathy. You really understood that person and cared for that person. I hope it's obvious why that matters in a democracy. Democracies aren't about agreeing with each other. As my boss, Yuval Levin, likes to say, our problem in the United States right now isn't that we can't agree. It's the problem is we don't know how to disagree. And my point isn't that reading lots of novels makes you a better person necessarily. Stalin read a lot of novels, and he was not known for his sympathy. But it is an opportunity to develop what's called a sympathetic imagination, the ability to understand where other people are coming from and to feel for them in a powerful way. On the other hand, I will say the mid-20th century American writer Flannery O'Connor complained that critics in particular overstated the importance of compassion in novels. And her complaint was, the point seems to be that all novels should be compassionate, and we should be compassionate towards all characters, no matter how flawed, because everybody's flawed. It's just part of human nature to be flawed. And I think literature should leave room for judgment and condemnation. Sympathy is not the same thing as always agreeing or approving, but it is important to kind of, I've not used the phrase put yourselves in somebody else's shoes yet, and I'm going to now. That is an important thing to do in a democracy.
So let me follow up. Your upcoming book talks about 13 books. Is it 13?
It's 13, yes.
13.
Lucky 13.
Lucky 13. But so you're making a case, though, for a certain type of book, for a book that has a certain type of, shall we say, values?
Yeah.
How do we want? So I'd like to dig into that. Like, how are we deciding what is it that we should be reading, and why are you making a case that actually there's a tenor of a book, there's a value in a book that is important that all students and certainly conservative students need to be reading? Unpack that for us about why that matters.
The premise of this book is that if you talk to a right-of-center person who reads fiction, and you end up talking about their your favorite novels, it tends to be the same handful of novels, something by Ayn Rand, like The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged. If the person is Catholic or Christian, the person will mention Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. Person might mention 1984, though everybody loves 1984, but conservatives do too. And Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe is another favorite. And my point isn't that those books are necessarily bad, though I think some of the ones I mentioned are, but that conservatives should kind of expand their bookshelves and recognize that there are a lot of other great novels we could be reading and talking about, and in the process, learning more about what it means to be a conservative, which is, let's face it now, kind of up in the air. President Trump has kind of changed certainly the Republican Party a lot, and shaken up the definition of conservatism, arguably. I don't want to give the impression that conservatives should only read these novels, but for conservatives, or frankly anybody interested in understanding core conservative principles that have endured over generations, these novels are good places to go. I go from the 18th century to more or less the present day, 2020. So, some examples. I write about a book by Samuel Johnson called Rasselas, which is technically not a novel. I cheated a little bit. And that book presents a vision of human nature in which human nature it's basically universal. It's constant. It's constant across peoples, continents, and time. Which doesn't mean everybody's the same, but it means that you can expect that people will want the same things from life. They will, in the case of this novel, young people will be, well, everybody is restless, and everybody wants something, wants to have some sort of pursuit and goal in life. And they're not happy until they identify that goal. And then they will work towards that goal. And you would think, well, once they achieve that goal, they will be happy. But the point of this book is no. Once we achieve what we want, we might be satisfied briefly, but human nature dictates that we quickly get restless again and move on to something else. It also makes points about the nature of reason, the nature of the imagination, and the bad directions both reason and the imagination could take us. Rasselas is fascinating in part because Samuel Johnson was not a huge fan of the American founding, but throughout this book he sounds like one of the founding fathers. The founding of our republic is based on some belief in a universal human nature about all men being created equal, and this novel does similar things. There's also a recurring aversion to utopianism. An element of conservative philosophy is that, yes, there is such a thing as a universal human nature. We are not blank slates. And part of that human nature is that we are flawed. We are necessarily imperfect. And as a result, we will never have a perfect government. We will never have a perfect society on earth. And so all visions of ideal governments, well, it's not necessarily bad to want an efficient government free of fraud and abuse, for example. We have to be realistic that there will always be imperfections in government because they are human institutions. And the urge to create a utopia often leads to great terror and death and suffering in the name of that utopia. So the novel I write about in that context is a Nathaniel Hawthorne novel called The Blithedale Romance, which is about... Didn't Hawthorne go to Bowdoin, by the way? Am I allowed to talk about him here? Sorry. Well, this guy, he's a terrible writer, frankly. I don't know what they taught him there. It's not like a vision of a world government or anything like that. It's a story of a small commune where everybody there has these really ambitious goals to create a perfect society, overturning the delusions of generations. And then before long, the narrator realizes that every generation is deluded in its own way, and this quest for a perfect society is doomed. You always have to take into account human imperfection when you're creating any society.
Okay, well, we don't want you to say any more because you'll want everyone to buy the book.
There are 11
right?
more novels
That's
to
right.
talk
We're not
about.
gonna-
We
we're
just
not
got
gonna-
started
we're
here.
not gonna do that. So you've opened the door on Trump and conservatism, but I'm not going to go in that because I do want to make sure we get to student
Okay,
questions.
great.
But I know Wilson and I both have some questions, and we will get back to them if we have time. But I know we have a number of students who are already ready, who are part of the small group, who are ready to ask questions. And where is it? Mason's right there. Let's start with Mason.
Hi, Mason.
Hey. I'm Mason. I'm a senior here. I've read some of your articles leading up to this talk, and I noticed you often frame your arguments from the perspective of as a conservative, positioning conservatism as an identity for your readers to align with. How would you respond to the idea that conservatives, similar to the left's identity politics, have adopted their own version of identity-based politics?
Yeah, I am a conservative, but I don't see that as. Yeah, I mean it's central to what I believe, but when I frame it that way, it's a way of putting my cards on the table primarily, but and to warn people of what's coming up next. You're not going to like this, guys. I think that conservatives, are in danger of that. I think there is an identity politics of the right. I don't think it has the domination in institutions that other identity politics do, but it's certainly a danger. And I would also say that there's a victim mentality on the right as well. Conservatives, when I was your age, a big component of conservatism was trying to remind people that they had agency and that they could overcome troubled backgrounds, a bad economy, or whatever. They could make something of their lives with hard work and with help. But they shouldn't rely on other people to make those decisions and that progress for them. I do think that the right is in danger of kind of its own version of victimhood and victimization politics. You see this a lot where, I think Trump taps into it, and I think that's what populism does. Populism, not all of populism is bad, but a lot of populism is they're screwing you over, and it's their fault that your life is this way. And I think that sometimes it is fair to blame other people for some people's problems, but sometimes it's just an easy excuse. And I think the right is starting to do that a little bit more. I don't think that's conservative. I think that's a populist right issue. I'm going to continue answering your question, by the way. You're going to be sorry you asked this. I was at an event a couple weeks ago, and a student said, should there be since conservatives are so outnumbered in universities, should there be a sort of affirmative action for conservative professors and students? And I don't think there should be. I think there are ways to welcome conservatives and just for the sake of broader conversation, having different ideas in a school. But I think the last thing conservatives should be doing is saying this department needs 3 professors who voted for Trump to hit the quota that we're looking for. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I think conservatives are tempted to use some of the weapons and vocabulary of the left that we had been complaining about for 25 years, and that frustrates me sometimes.
Great. Where are my other 2? Right there. Oh, everyone's easily.
Hi, my name is Asa, and I'm a sophomore.
Hello.
So I like when you were talking about books that are able to differentiate between understanding and accepting, and you were also talking about reading books that talk about like a utopia
Mhm.
and trying to be able to create a perfect government. So I was wondering, how do you feel about Musk's involvement in the government right now?
Oh, well.
Yeah.
It's good to have a calm voice of reason on the scene. And I think that's what Musk is really bringing to the administration. So, joking. It's joking. All right. Yeah. Okay. I like a lot of what Musk is doing. I mean, I think that's kind of a great example of what I was talking about in the previous question. I don't think that this is the most conservative way to approach a real problem that conservatives have been complaining about for as long as I've been alive, which is that there are a lot of government agencies and institutions and programs that does work. Nobody really knows what they're doing. They've been doing these things for a long time, and they may have outlived their usefulness, and we should get rid of them. My favorite thing about the second Trump presidency is that he is paying attention to that and doing things that previous Republican administrations have never done and have been unable to do. But I also think he's setting a bad there's potential for him setting bad precedent here by bringing in Musk to lead the charge, because you have to wonder, well, what would this look like if a Democratic president were doing the same thing? Would Republicans like Democrats to kind of, I don't think he's working outside the system, but it's certainly an unorthodox approach to the problem. And the answer is going to be something like, well, nobody else did it before, and so this obviously is the way you have to do it. But I'm not sure that's really true. So that's a long way of saying I like the job Musk has, but I am not entirely comfortable with him doing the job the way he's doing it. I think more reasonable have been some of the executive orders that I wish Trump did more than executive orders, but he's issued some pretty good executive orders about regulations and cutting back on regulations, and he did that in the first term too. But that's just not as splashy, and Trump likes to make a splash.
Great. Anyone over on this side of the? I can't. Oh wait, sorry, don't want to miss you. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for being with us again tonight.
You're welcome.
My question happens to be pretty relevant to what we've been talking about. I read your first op-ed and I really liked what you had to say. So I'm wondering, in the past you've pushed back against conservative politicians like Marco Rubio who dismissed the value of a liberal arts degree.
I voted for Marco Rubio that year, by the way, though, so I got over that.
And given your defense of a liberal arts as essential to a thriving democracy, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the Trump administration's recent funding cutbacks to the Department of Education. How do you think these cuts will impact the Department of Ed's role in managing student loan debt and ensuring access to a well-rounded education for all that you seem to care about?
I am not convinced that the Department of Education is a really valuable department. And I think a lot of what they do could be done at the state level. And that's been a Republican, if you want to call it talking point, it's been a Republican idea since Jimmy Carter established the Department of Education. Students have not, student performance has not gotten better since we've had a Department of Education. So I think that, I think it would be another very bold move to get rid of the Department of Education. I don't think you necessarily need to do that, but I don't think it would be the end to academic greatness in the United States if we did get rid of the Department of Education. You mentioned student loans. I think that the federal role in education is one reason that tuitions are so high. And if a school knows that the federal government is going to backstop the tuition, they're going to jack up the tuition. So that's not necessarily related to getting rid of the Department of Education, but I think we need to rethink how much of a role the federal government is playing in funding educations. Also happy to talk about student loans too. And do you guys want to talk about President Biden? No, we don't need to do that. But I thought that the student loan forgiveness was a horrible idea for all sorts of reasons. But in part because it would just perpetuate the bad cycle that we're getting in with federal funding of education, of higher education in particular.
I think we have I haven't seen you ask a question so far. So, Denise? Okay. Yes, you right there.
Thank you. This isn't time like reserved for like the in the news class or.
You're welcome to. Yeah.
Okay. I'm Sam. I'm a junior. Thank you for
Hi.
joining us tonight. I suppose in the spirit of sympathy and getting to understand alternative perspectives, and this is a little similar to the last question that was asked. But I was wondering how you square your conviction in the liberal arts with some of the anti-intellectualism.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the right term, but that, generally along those lines, it seems to perfuse more like conservative political and cultural spaces. With like specific reference, I didn't really have time to read many op-eds or articles of yours, but I did my due diligence and maybe scrolling through your Twitter feed or looking around and.
Always good.
I
Start
found,
with the Twitter
one
feed.
tweet where it's like like something along the lines like if you're not a true conservative this week if you don't support Tulsi Gabbard, Eric Adams, and RFK. And I was thinking, well, RFK has been like widely panned by some news outlets and talking heads for his anti-intellectual approaches that might seem to be contradicting some of the aspects of the liberal arts in terms of a strong belief in maybe scientific processes or building upon established research. And I was wondering, when you see statements that are made by these figures, how do you settle these with your own ideals?
Well, I'm happy to report that tweet was sarcastic.
Forgive me.
That week, I think RFK Jr. had just been confirmed, or was about to be. Tulsi Gabbard's hearings had gone smoothly, and Trump decided to not prosecute Eric Adams. All of them had, Adams is still a Democrat, RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard had been Democrats until recently. And so the joke was, this week, you're not a real conservative unless you support these three Democrats or former Democrats. The remarkable thing about MAGA, as defenders of MAGA will say, it's a coalition. So Trump brought in these people who are not traditionally part of the conservative movement. And it was probably a smart move in some regards. I think RFK Jr. probably brought in quite a few votes for Trump. But I loathe all three of them for the reasons you just said about RFK Jr. I think he's a horrible pick for that position. I understand why President Trump did it. He felt like he owed him something. But I think a healthy democracy needs some dose of skepticism towards experts. But there's a fine line between that and complete quackery. And I think this isn't just a Republican problem, but populism really embraces quackery too often. So here's an example of conservatives being, I think, rightly skeptical of experts. William F. Buckley Jr., one of the kind of founders of the American conservative movement from the 1950s forward, said, "I would rather be governed by the first 50 names in the Boston phone book than the faculty of Harvard," something like that. And the joke is that it doesn't mean that the Harvard professors are idiots. It's just that in a democracy, you have to hope that the average citizen has wisdom and has common sense and can be good at governing themselves and helping govern other people. And so we can't rely only on experts. We need to know when to challenge experts. We are a democracy, and that means that we rule it. We rule ourselves, and we can't just hand things over to experts. And I hope I'm not stepping into too much hot water when I say I think we saw that with COVID. We thought the experts were right at the time, but then when it was clear that the experts weren't really sure either, we still handed too much power over to them. And because the experts guided us so terribly, you look at what happened to, going back to education, you look what happened to learning because people weren't actually in person at school. That opened the door to quackery. And people like RFK Jr. suddenly have a lot of credibility because he challenges experts and says things, I'm just asking questions. An over-reliance on experts can lead to disasters, which I think much of what happened during the lockdown was disastrous, and in the process, that leaves the door open for people who lean too heavily against experts and question settled science that really has been settled for generations in the case of vaccines, for example.
Oh, no, you're going to pass it. No, sorry, no follow-up. We have too many people that want questions. And I see there's some, I want to make sure we get up top too. I don't know if, Amanda's over there to give you a mic.
Hi, my name's Della, and I'm a freshman. You mentioned earlier that novels play an important role in understanding different characters and also understanding people around us. And on that note of expanding our viewpoints and learning from different backgrounds, what do you see as the role for DEI programs in higher education, especially amidst the Trump administration's efforts to repeal a lot of those programs?
These segues are great. I like them. I think that DEI programs are very flawed ways of serving a good purpose, which is to make people who are in the context of universities underrepresented feel comfortable in the new environments. And in the process help them succeed in schools. But I think they tend to breed, I don't know if resentment's the right word, but distrust, and at least among maybe the people who are not part of those programs and initiatives. And I think that the equity element of that is a real issue. Because I think that, I'm not the first conservative to say this, but the move from equality to equity is a problem. And equity implies kind of uniform results, and I just don't think that's, I think equality of opportunity, especially at a university, is great. But if you look at any public school website for like a public school district, the first thing they mention is equity. And I understand why. They want to make sure that it's clear that everybody in that school district knows that they are welcome at the district, and that they're going to get a fair shot. And that's important. I'm not suggesting that's not important. But equity means a lot more than that. And it means assuming that disparities in performance are the result of racism, and this particularly systemic racism. I don't mean to suggest those things don't exist, but I don't think that's the catch-all cause of disparity in results. There are probably other issues at play as well. And I would like to see, instead of equity, the first thing is excellence, is the first thing listed on college websites and school districts. The recognition that every student in that district, at that school, will receive an excellent education, or at least have the opportunity to receive an excellent education. That is equality. Doesn't mean equality of outcome, because not everybody's going to get an A. But it means, in public schools in particular, giving everybody that opportunity and that excellent education.
There's so much we could talk about there. That could be a whole nother conversation.
could,
I'm,
yeah.
of course, thinking about the historical underpinnings of who was getting an excellent education
Uh-huh.
for how long, and so there's a lot of context there.
Yeah, I'm certainly not suggesting, and I think conservatives in general, those who are skeptical of DEI, do not believe that the education system was always fair. But to quote Chief Justice Roberts, the way to end racism is to end racism, and DEI programs, I don't think, are ending racism. They are. It's race. Often, it's racism in another form.
So, one other hot button issue, just to jump in with everyone here. I'm curious because I think you all are thinking a lot about what's happening to federal funding cuts to education, to colleges, right? And also what's happening to speech on campus. And we talked about this a little bit, right, in my background. Trump recently suggested that anyone who was involved in illegal protests on campuses we'd pull federal funding, students would be expelled, kicked off campus. So conservatives, I think, have had for a long time have said that the left has really stifled, really chilled speech on campuses, and there's arguments about that. Are you concerned that kind of statement from Trump could have another chilling effect? I mean, you're committed to this, this is so much of what this is about, this whole series, right? Is that we don't agree, we're not sure how we approach things, but we want to get curious about. So, are you concerned about? I mean, you've been concerned about on the left. Are you concerned about on the right now too?
No.
No.
I'm just kidding. The thing.
I laughed.
Yeah, you see it on the right too. There is, I think it's, let's go back to Trump's comment.
Okay.
And since you're experiencing the ACLU, can I ask you a question?
Oh, gosh.
Is there such a thing as an illegal protest?
It's an interesting question, right? Because
Thank you.
no, it really is.
I'm new at this, asking questions. Yeah.
They're all like, "This is not about you, Allison." They're supposed to do that. I think this is where the word chilling effect came to me, because illegal protests. The issue is there is lots of litigation about what is appropriate, what is reasonable time, manner, restriction, right? There's litigation everywhere. So when you're just does this chill conversation, because students can say, well, what does that mean, illegal protest? How do I even know? When am I engaged in illegal? When is it legal? I thought I'm supposed to be here exercising my ability to have a conversation. So I'm just,
I think I'm not worried that it would cause a chilling, that statement in itself will, but I do think it's possible for the reaction or the pendulum to swing too far the other way. Here's what I think should be done with campus protests. Like, first of all, it seems to me that, there are most protests on campus are probably perfectly, not only perfectly reasonable, but great demonstrations of, the catchphrase, "This is what democracy looks like." I buy that with some of the protests on campus. But I think that there are other protests, occasions when protesters are preventing students from going on campus and getting to class. That's unacceptable. It doesn't matter what cause they're supporting or protesting. They cannot obstruct the education of their classmates. I don't think I don't think President Trump should necessarily chime in on what's going on at every campus, but I think college administrators need to very clearly establish what is permitted. I don't know what's going on in Colby. Maybe you guys can tell me, but what we saw a couple years ago in the Ivy League, the problem was that there just weren't. Seemed like there were rules, but administrators were not willing to enforce them at all. That doesn't mean necessarily arresting the students, but I do think it's fair to punish students who, as long as the rules are clearly established and the protests violate those rules. I think some behavior should be chilled. Blocking your classmates from going to class, let's chill that. better yet, let's just chill, guys. Interrupting classes, we should chill that sort of behavior. But administrators need to very clearly say, here's what we will allow. In fact, I mean, maybe we can encourage this. That does not include students overtaking administrative buildings and making it impossible for like the dean or provost or president to get to their office and things like that. I don't think Trump should block federal funds for those schools, but administrators need to be realistic. That if that behavior isn't punished, it's just going to keep going on.
Okay. Oh my goodness, so many things. I just want to get some
She's
people.
really excited in
I know,
the middle
but,
there.
but he's asked questions many times.
Oh, okay,
So
okay.
I just want to make sure people who haven't asked also get. I don't feel like I've seen you ask a question. Are you a student? Yes. Great. Can we? You're in the community section. I wasn't quite sure. Just needed to check.
Yeah, no, I missed the cutoff for all the tables down there. My name's Kira. I'm a freshman.
Hi.
I actually have had the privilege of growing up in McLean, Virginia, which
Oh,
is
wow.
just about 15 minutes south of D.C. for those who aren't quite aware of Virginia geography. All that aside.
No. Let's follow up. Where'd you go to high school?
Langley.
I too went to Langley High School.
Micah Herzig was my senior year economics and government teacher.
Right.
So I hear supposedly that he invited Chief Justice Scalia at one point,
Yeah.
at one point to come over to class. Is that actually true?
Yeah, so I should clarify, my dad was but a mere associate justice, never chief justice.
see.
But the main thing is
My bad.
everybody's pronouncing the last name right. That's what most people struggle with. My dad spoke at Langley a number of times, delivered commencement addresses, there were classes that would visit the Supreme Court on occasion. My dad would talk to them, and he probably visited classrooms too, as far as I know.
I see. Good to know. All that aside, that wasn't why I wanted to have the mic. Sorry for the upfrontness. If I remember correctly, you mentioned earlier in the evening that if you had a chance, you would be happy to say a couple things to perhaps the Senate, or just you would have a word of advice for, encouraging more bipartisan action on the Hill. Am I reading that correctly, or?
It sounds like something I might have said. Yeah.
Okay. Here, let's rephrase that. Given that you have an idea of what you think might work better than the current inability to disagree,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
what kind of advice would you give, perhaps, to officials on the Hill right now?
Yeah. Okay. That's. Thank you for asking that. Go Saxons. I think this is especially true of Congress. Our elected representatives are, I'm not sure we're sending the best and the brightest. And I fear that we are sending people who like attention and like Twitter, and I like Twitter too. But we've already seen the trouble that can lead to. But who like Twitter above everything. I remember when Obama was president, I remember thinking, why is he on Twitter? This is ridiculous. This is the president. And then Trump got into office, and now J.D. Vance seems to be on Twitter all the time. And it's just, I just don't think it's productive. We were talking earlier about the relationship my father had with Justice Ginsburg. They didn't agree on a whole lot. They did agree on a lot, but they were also very different, and they had very different approaches to the Constitution. And when they disagreed with each other, that would be very clear from the dissents they wrote. But they were friends, and they had been friends for a long time, and their spouses were friends too. My father got Justice Ginsburg roses every year on her birthday, and one year, a former clerk of his was in my dad's chambers and saw the dozen roses for Justice Ginsburg, and he said, the former clerk was joking. He was teasing my dad, so he wasn't really being serious. But he said, why do you do that? What do you ever get out of this? When was the last time she agreed with you on a big issue? I mean, this is just a waste of roses. And my dad said, some things are more important than votes. And the point wasn't that their job wasn't important. And the point was that they should agree at all times. The point was that their friendship is really what mattered, and getting along with each other, and like gestures of affection like that. Federal judges have the advantage of not having to run for office, so they don't have to be jerks in public and to talk about what schmucks their opponents are. So there are incentives for elected representatives to be jerks to each other, and people seem to like it. But I would recommend that elected representatives stay offline for a little bit, and recognize that a democracy like ours requires compromise, and that means sometimes upsetting people who voted for you. But that means you need to be good at explaining your decisions to the people who voted for you. And I would recommend. I think that would be the main. Oh, and not to view your position as the office you hold as a springboard for something else, whether it's another position or another elected position, or whether it's a job in the next administration, or whether it's behind a news desk or something like that. Those are, I think, practical steps. I think I would recommend.
Okay, I think we have a question. We're not going to get to everyone. I think, Charlie, you want to do the last one, and then we'll do, you can do the whole, why don't you do all the rapid fire? You could throw in one extra if you want. Sorry, hardest person to get to.
Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm a sophomore American Studies major. I'm wondering what your thoughts are with Trump potentially disagreeing with the Supreme Court, as he is the way to kind of execute all of their orders. What are your thoughts on that as someone who is the son of a Supreme Court justice, and what he's doing with that situation?
Well, I think he should not. And he said something a couple weeks ago that I thought was fairly reassuring, that he recognized that he could not. I think the irony of Trump is that for people who view the Constitution as I do, and that's a lot of conservatives, really happy with the judges he picked, because they've kind of helped restore in the judiciary our vision of how the laws should be interpreted, how the Constitution should be interpreted, and I think kind of in general a broad respect for the Constitution. And that's ironic for Trump to have done, because you often get the sense that he does not actually feel that way about the Constitution. Like when he tweeted or truthed or whatever he did when he was out of office about suspending the Constitution so that he could be president because he won the election. There are things like that make you think and a couple weeks ago he said, no person could break the law who's trying to make his nation great. That's not true. So things like that worry me. But and he says things about judges that I think are he's done it less lately, but when he was in his first term, when he was running for office, he said some bizarre things about judges. But when it comes to the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary, that element of Trump's administration doesn't worry me as much as some other ones.
Okay, we've got 30 seconds.
Okay.
Or 45 seconds, rapid fire, do it.
One book that the audience should read to understand what conservatism is.
This is an unrealistic expectation, but I always suggest Waverly by Sir Walter Scott. He was a contemporary of Jane Austen. At the time, he was much more popular than Jane Austen. Tastes change. But it's kind of it's a novel about somebody who finds himself in the middle of a revolution, an attempt to overthrow the British king for somebody else who argued he had a rightful claim to the throne. And it's a great look into Edmund Burke's style of conservatism. So if you're familiar with Reflections on the Revolution in France, it's in large part an argument about gradual change, not overthrowing things, and an argument for experience and tradition over theory and abstract knowledge. And that novel, Waverly by Walter Scott, that's Waverly by Walter Scott, is kind of a great, the conservative thinker Russell Kirk said that Scott basically fictionalized the ideas of Edmund Burke and brought them to more people than Burke himself would have been able to.
Okay, I got a yes, no. Is the Reagan,
I forgot about the rapid fire part. Yeah, sorry. Waverly by Walter Scott. Yeah.
Is the Reagan Republican Party dead?
No.
No, okay.
It's not in power.
Right, yeah. And final one. Final one.
Rapid.
Yeah. I'm trying to go over what my best one is. What was the greatest piece of advice your father ever gave you?
He gave me a lot of good advice. No offense on this one. Don't be a lawyer. Told me to work hard every day I went. Was when I was going off to school. He said work hard. Very basic, but you remember that kind of thing. But I have to say, my father, and he gave me great suggestions for books to read. Like, he told me to read a book by Russell Kirk that has really shaped how I understand literature. He told me to read Edmund Burke's Reflections. But my father, I know, I'm speaking quickly, but I'm not giving a rapid answer. My father was more a model just by his behavior and what I saw him do. I saw him come home every night to have dinner with his family. I saw him praying. I saw him take us to Mass every week. I saw him working hard late at night after dinner. I saw what was important to him, and it was his job, absolutely, but it was also his family, his wife, and his religion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris Scalia, so much. Thank you, Wilson, and thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Wilson. Appreciate it. Thank you guys very much. These are great questions.
Thank you.
Allison, thank you very much.